Okay, yeah. Um, take two. Thank you for everyone who watched the previous video. Yeah, I'm just gonna carry on talking because I don't want to overthink this, and I feel like in between the time that we decided I'm gonna talk about this and now, I've already started to low-key overthink it. But I've had interesting reads, listens, and conversations with regards to fatherlessness, and particularly how women become more masculine because of fatherlessness. So, for me and I think you both, we have had different versions. You, if you don't mind me sharing, not present father, and for me, a present father who wasn't available. And I'm not here to talk about those people who are fathers because their stories are unique and they all went through their own things. And you get to a point in your life where you start to realize that blaming them for your situation is not necessarily worth it, because at the end of the day, they have gone through what they needed to go through for themselves. And a lesson I think we both learned yesterday was that God does certain things with our fathers to protect us from certain things. A very big lesson I am taking in, because He is our ultimate father, right? And He knows better than all of us, so He knew what to protect us from. I can't imagine we'd be probably very different people if mine was available and yours was around.
Probably different places right now.
Probably, and who knows if that would have been good or bad at all. But I feel like we're both in a good space, so God knew what He was doing. But at the same time, what I wanted to discuss was how women become more masculine because of this. And it's an interesting conversation to me because I hear people say all the time that we are feminists. As someone actually, I don't think I told you this, someone told me last year that the way that I speak, I sound like a feminist. And I'd never thought about it. And it's because I defend women, but my masculine traits are based off self-protection because I never had that safety net. So I learned to adapt those masculine traits on the basis of protecting myself. But what I find interesting is feminism developed because women felt insignificant. Like they weren't allowed to vote, they weren't allowed to make decisions, they didn't have autonomy over a lot of things. Patriarchy kind of made the decisions, well, still makes a lot of decisions on behalf of women. You see this with the abortion conversation in the US. And this is me not saying whether I am or for it. I'm just mentioning it as an example because people like to nitpick on small unnecessary things. But the thing about it is, when this person said this to me, I was actually a little bit insulted because I don't think of myself as a feminist. However, I do have super masculine traits. And I have masculine traits based on the fact that my experiences have put me in a place where I'm just like, if the man who is supposed to be protecting me is not going to protect me, I'm going to protect me. And I'm going to have to put on those masculine traits in order to make sure that I am safe. Because women are supposed to feel like they are safe and secure, and this is how we're supposed to be brought up. This is why fathering is so important. So I posted a couple of things on Instagram. One of the things you sent me about the girl whose father bashed her. And I've had a very similar experience. It's actually shocking. But one of the things that I was speaking about today in the session that I went to was about how your father is the one who sets the foundation for who it is you become and what it is you do. And they provide a kind of security. And the word that the woman used was the affirmation that we need in order to live secure lives, right? Now, there's a very different understanding between affirmation and someone who praises you, for instance. Like if I praise you, say, oh, you did really well, whatever. But affirmation is like giving you a solid foundation to stand on. Like this space of who I am is immovable. It gives you more insight to who you are early, because the person who then was responsible for raising you has kind of set that foundation. And feminism, in my opinion, this is not, I've read a lot about it. I've read a lot about feminist concepts later that are not exactly linked to feminism, but in my understanding, feminism rose out of a need to have more autonomy over that grounding. And let me break that down. From what I understand, because society has been so patriarchal and men have run the show for so long, women didn't have a voice. For many, we still don't have a voice, let's be honest. We think we have a voice, but the decision still gets made by a man at the end of the day. One of the conversations that I was listening to the other day was how women still get told in marriages that they have to be and act a particular way, and at the end of the day, what happens in that marriage is still not her decision. And if she doesn't understand that, then she is not submitting. Submission has nothing to do with that. In fact, I'm not going to go down, that's a different set of conversations. But in my understanding, the idea of feminism arose from women being able to have some autonomy over the decisions that get made over them, because safety is not the same thing as you getting to choose over my life. It is not the same thing. It is you affirming me as I come up and giving me a solid foundation to stand on, where the self that I become aware of has a solid place to stand. And obviously society and men have interpreted this in many different ways, and one of them is control. And it was interesting to me because for many years, in fact, I've wanted to understand femininity, not feminism. I couldn't understand why I was such a masculine woman, and why I was the solution one, and why I wanted to learn this and do that and then be the solution. And a lot of the time it was stressful to be that way, because I'm not built to be the solution-driven person or partner or whatever the case may be. And I had a friend who was teaching on feminism, and I said to her I wanted to join one of her classes. At the time I couldn't pay for it, but what I was learning from the session she was posting on Facebook was that femininity, most women who are feminine in their nature, and I'm not talking about the way you dress, the way you wear your hair, your makeup, that has nothing to do with femininity. Women who are feminine in their nature have come up in one of two scenarios. So either she's had a solid father figure who has affirmed her from birth, who still affirms her as she comes up, and she knows he's a safe place to go to, or the actual one that I noticed through a family member is she has had no access to her father. But in all the ways that she is just feminine. She was raised by her grandmother and her mother, and surrounded by all of these feminine woman figures in her life, based on the fact that her grandfather was very masculine. So all the women that came in his circle were feminine because he carried his masculinity well. So she inherited those feminine traits, which is beautiful to watch, because she doesn't have to be in control of what she's thinking, what she's doing, how she's moving. She doesn't have to be the one making the decisions. None of that. She moves so comfortably in her femininity. And mind you, this woman is not in a relationship. She wants a relationship, but she's not in a relationship. And yet, men are drawn to her energy based on the fact that she just lives in her feminine traits. And for years, I've observed her and always wondered how she is able to exist in that. You know, it just seems, I don't know, in my head, like I'm a visual person, so in my head I imagine like flowy and easy and relaxed and feels safe, you know. And she takes care of all her own stuff. I mean, she works for herself, she takes care of herself, all of those things, but that has nothing to do with how she operates. And it is something I always desired to learn. I still haven't learned it yet. But it's so beautiful to watch. And I feel like God had set up the situation for women to be able to operate that way, because as being the man's help, she's able to, how can I say, support softly. She can give him like advice that he will listen to because of the approach that she comes. Now, the Lord didn't make me like that. Sadly. I'm still trying to figure out, Lord, why am I the way I am? But okay, that's a different conversation. However, the conversation is interesting to me because I don't think we realize how deeply fatherlessness impacts, I mean, it impacts men, but it impacts women at such a massive rate. So things like promiscuity young early in life, or women who kind of just shut themselves off from the world, or women who decide they are the ones, no, I'm not talking about you, women who decide that they need to be in control of every aspect of their lives because they had nobody who was going to take responsibility for those things. And it's I saw something on, was it on Instagram this week, they were talking about burnout. I totally see why women have burnout, because what's constantly still happening is we are teaching men that control and this equal partnership thing, which is a completely different conversation, means that I don't have to foundationally affirm her, which could mean anything from financial support, which I'm not going to tote because I know what's happening in spaces with women wanting men to support them financially. People, it's a mess. But financial support, physical support, emotional support, which is so important. Like, I don't think men realize if I can be my woman's safe space, that woman will kiss your feet for a lifetime. And something that I heard T.D. Jakes and his wife Sarah Jakes talk about last week was, actually Jenna Mountain mentioned it so nicely. She said her husband calls her soldier. Like they're in the military together and they will fight for one another and not against each other, but have each other's backs. And T.D. Jakes and his wife Sarah Jakes spoke about it like that as well, because you understand that when you're married to someone, you are part, core, inside, outside of every part of each other. And women who tend to be feminine in their marriages are usually covered. And I use the word covered, so he's our foundation and he's our covering. Oh, that's scriptural. Let's not go down that road. But and her covering, she's safe because she's held from the bottom and from the top. And those of us who don't have fathers and don't have present fathers, we lack that. So when a covering comes over us without this foundation, we feel like we are being suffocated. Because I've now had to hold this foundation for myself so long, it feels like you're trying to come and take over. And what's been interesting is I came across a scripture today. I'm going to read from the Bible, y'all. I know for the people who know me for a very long time that this may seem a little scary or sketchy or weird, but this is how it is. God's been dealing with me in all sorts of ways. So y'all just going to have to deal with what's happening right now. But I love this scripture because it came down to also not only foundationally our relationships with our fathers, but also the definition of discipline and how important discipline is. And every time someone talks about discipline in the Bible, they use one scripture. They don't branch out. The scripture that they always use is, spare the rod, spoil the child. That is so vague because that can mean 1,000 different things. And I remember that being told to us naughty children, because us naughty PKs, yeah. The problem is no one actually explained that the Bible actually expands what that means. And it expands it so beautifully. And the reason it's so important for me now to read this is because through this hard season that I've been in, there's been often times when I ask God, why did you put me through this? But he was disciplining me. And he was disciplining me. How can I say this? Okay, the scripture starts with, if you endure chastening. And I'm going to stop there. It's Hebrews 12 verse 7. If you endure chastening, that's the beginning of the scripture. The word that stood out to me was endurance. Because I don't think people realize that when you're going through a hard time, how important endurance is. But I also don't think I fully understood that endurance is necessary for learning. And for me, that was like soft. Until I understood that it was learning discipline. That was the important part. There are disciplines now that I have that I never would have imagined I would have had before this experience. But fathers are there for that reason. We discipline or chasten you. Fathers discipline and chasten you in the right way because it teaches you endurance, but it teaches you disciplines that you can use in your life. Okay, anyway. God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom a father does not chasten? So essentially what sons there are, like if a father doesn't discipline you, doesn't love you. Someone said this to me last year and it stood out to me. I was like, there's a difference between control, abuse, and discipline. If someone disciplines you, they love you because they're trying to teach you how to carry your life, how to manage your life. They teach you the tools that you can actually use. That is actually discipline. But okay. But if you are without chastening, of which all have become partakers, then you are an illegitimate and not sons. So it said, but one was spare the rod, spoil the child. You know how interesting it is to me that they use the word illegitimate. You know what an illegitimate child means? Someone who was born, who doesn't become an heir. So if you have, the king has a child with someone outside of his marriage, that child doesn't become an heir to the throne. Mm-hmm. That is so interesting. Because if I didn't learn, or if I was not disciplined by God in this time, I'm going to use this as an example, I'm going to come back to the father thing. If I was not disciplined in this time by God, or he didn't chasten me and I didn't endure this time in order to learn how to add those disciplines to my life, I can by default not inherit the kingdom because I automatically don't, I move in ways that doesn't make me a legitimate heir of what it is he promised me. That I feel like is a sermon. Like I could write an entire sermon on that. But the point I wanted to make around femininity, feminism, not femininity, masculinity, femininity, and fatherhood was that the reason fathers are so important is because, an example I heard this week is they are the metaphor for who God is as a father. So what happens with people who have fatherlessness issues or deep father wounds, we automatically interpret God that way. How can I trust God? Because the man who was supposed to be my father was not in my life. And as women, automatically, we want to become those fathers for ourselves. And if we're not going to do that, we're going to go searching for that father in somebody else, which is more than likely what's going to end up happening. Or we end up in exactly the same situations where we are being abandoned emotionally in most cases, or we are being, whatever the case was with our father, being abused in the same way, whatever the case is. But I wanted to talk about this because I don't think as parents, and especially mothers, we really consider how the masculine traits that we picked up as children are being translated to our daughters. And if we're even having these conversations with our partners or our husbands with how our daughters are being raised. Because it is so important for a girl to understand that her father is her safe space. She's never going to understand that in God if she doesn't understand that about her father. He demonstrates the love of God to her. And she will never, well, she can, but it's more difficult to have a trust relationship with God if your trust relationship with your father is broken due to his own issues. And I'm not saying men shouldn't have issues. I'm not saying mothers are bad either, good either. But I'm focusing on this specifically because what's happening now is that, especially in this environment that I've been in, I've seen so many broken women who are so protective of themselves and then use their bodies as tools to find that lack. I mean, how many, in the place we stay in, how many prostitutes have we seen of late?
Way too many, actually.
Girl. And they are proud prostitutes. And I can't judge them because their circumstances have found them in a place where they are. It's not a choice I'm willing to make. I can live on the street. It's not a choice I'm willing to make. But still, the fact that it is so easy for them to make that decision is a pure indicator that that foundation doesn't exist. Morally, emotionally, spiritually, that tip doesn't exist. Because for all of us, Fathers teach us right from wrong. They teach us foundationally what we need to choose going forward, who we are. They help us secure who we are, even if it means we need to develop that a little bit later and flourish it. But they kind of give us a grounding of who we are initially and where we come from, right? And if that foundation doesn't exist, we can be whoever, wherever, and that moral compass doesn't necessarily work, right? I'm moving away from the fact that a lot can change and people can learn and will learn and hopefully get education around things like this. But what I'm finding scarier every day is that in close spaces or in friendships or in relationships, these conversations are not being taken to the dinner table. I feel like all families should have an opportunity to sit at a dinner table, or couples should have, before they even have children, discuss what your ideas of parenting and holding our family is from a man's point of view. It's a mistake that many of us make not to have, and then we end up in relationships where that foundation doesn't exist, and then we start a new family curse that goes down the line. And I was so, like, when it came up, I was so passionate about it at the time. Hey, these people are noisy, eh? It's Friday. I'm so passionate about it because I know for many of us there's nothing we can do to change the way things were. And for all intents and purposes, there's some things we shouldn't have to want to change, because if we're not learning what God is trying to teach us through those experiences, then there was no point, right? We need to actually intentionally want to know what it is He was doing through those processes. I know for me personally, it was disciplining me as a father, teaching me to endure, but also teaching me to trust in Him, because foundationally He is my father, right? I have a father, but we don't have a relationship, and we are both fine with that. I've healed from it, so it doesn't bother me like it used to many years ago, because now my relationship with God is actually developing in a way where I understand what father means to me now. There's a flip side to this, though, that's been very interesting to observe. I've seen people who have not had fathers and have followed through the principles and instruction in the Bible and with God so closely that they have become rigid. That human part of them has been put on hold because they feel like they need to attain a certain level of acceptance from God in order to be legitimate. And it's such a dangerous place to be, because you almost cross a line of self-righteousness and not recognize that in that self-righteousness you are also sinning. It's such a fine line, and I find this happens more with men than it does with women. Women are more likely not to align themselves to scripture in that way if they haven't had a father. They usually go through a different process. Men tend to do this because they try to learn some sort of way to be a man. But in saying all of that, I think both of us, in both of our lives, we know people who have really good fathers. We've seen it, we've observed it. I have friends who are amazing dads, who are so involved in their children's lives. So I just wanted to talk about this because even for those dads and their wives, I hope that they have this discussion around the table around, am I being intentional enough as a father to understand my impact on not only this child's life, but the children that they bring up afterwards? And if I am intentional enough to teach them and discipline them in ways that they can carry forward, but also make the girl child feel safe enough to embrace her feminine. Because it's so nice to have a woman who feels safe enough and feminine enough, where she finds a partner when she grows up who is all of those beautiful things. Usually when one or the other thing is missing, she tends to look for the same thing, and then it ends up in bad situations more often than not. and look, I'm generalizing quite a lot here, so it's not like I'm saying all men, all women, all children, whatever. Everyone's, it can literally, anything can happen. The person can end up anywhere. But I wanted us to have a little bit more in-depth conversation. And this is the thing. The other thing I wanted to say was in the beginning that I completely forgot. This is just my thoughts, my opinions, my reading, my understanding of it. I don't expect anybody to agree with me. But what I would like, if you don't agree with me, please tell me what you think. Because for me, I feel like we can all learn from one another. I really want to learn more. I don't have the scientific studies or whatever. I just do a lot of reading. But I want to know what other people's more in-depth conversations and thoughts is around this. And also how fathers are intentionally teaching their sons to be men who know how to foundationally support the woman in their lives. I don't think men realize that there's a term that I used with someone a couple of weeks ago and they had no idea what it meant. And this term is important to me because for someone who's felt silenced and unheard for a very long time, when I finally learned the term, I was like, this is something I feel like men, especially South African men, don't get here educationally. And it's about holding space. So you know when someone dies in your family, everybody's mourning. The people who come, they are coming to mourn with you or beside you, whatever. But there's a difference between mourning beside you and holding space for you. So holding space for you is when you're going through a traumatic time and they're able to just, not even just be a soundboard, but they are holding an atmosphere for you to feel vulnerable enough to share your entire self. I don't feel like a lot of men understand what holding space means, especially for their children. Because the second the child becomes emotional and says things, however, that issue of respect becomes their first problem. Now you're disrespecting me, I don't have to hear anything you say. And then immediately when you do that, you invalidate this child's feelings. And understand why this happens. I know people in my life who have an issue, who struggle to hear you the minute they feel disrespected. The problem with that is, for those of us who are doing the disrespecting, we don't know that we are disrespecting you. We are just sharing how we feel, and we are hoping that it's going to be vulnerably safe enough for us to share that information. And when the second it feels like it's not safe, we pull back, and then we don't trust you enough to share our vulnerability anymore. Relationships are complex. Parental, children, family, partner relationships are complex. But I want men to understand that holding space for a woman is very important. That doesn't mean she gets to complain. Don't get me wrong. And that also doesn't mean she gets to go out of her way to disrespect you. But I was saying to you this afternoon, I was in a bit of an argument with someone and they completely dismissed how I felt because they hurt me. They completely dismissed how I felt and kept attacking me when I told them how I felt about what they did. And I said to you, if they had just acknowledged how I felt and then attacked me, I would have listened. Do you know what I'm saying? I would have taken both. Because at least you held the space long enough to acknowledge how I feel. To know that as a woman, as a feeling person, however masculine I am, as a feeling person, that those feelings have a space, you heard them. And if you heard them, it gives you at least an opportunity to consider them. And then if you came at me, fine. But just saying in one line, I'm sorry I made you feel that way. It was not my intention. But you, I would have taken that. But now you dismiss my entire feelings. I'm just like, I am snipping our friendship altogether. We aren't gonna be friends after that. Like, we're done. Because it's a massive indicator that if I'm going through something really big, that you cannot be present for me. But you expect me to be present for you when you're going through something. So I wanted to have this conversation because I want us to talk a little bit more about it. I am going to say bye now because I've been sitting and talking for a lot longer than I expected. But this is a very important conversation to have, especially if you are having children, have children. Even if your children are teenagers, it may be a good place to start. May be to ask your teenagers in particular, do you feel like you're safe to express your feelings around me? Specifically with girls, if they say no, you know you're raising a masculine girl, and there may be, especially for the men, places you need to look at where she doesn't feel safe that you may have to rectify. Because there's nothing worse than a masculine girl who feels unheard, unseen in her home, and without, where she's not validated as a person, but also where, what was the word that I used earlier, where she's not affirmed as a person. She will go seek it somewhere else. I'm not even speaking it over your life, I'm promising you. She will go and try and find it somewhere else. So yeah, see you guys next time. We're not gonna do the other things. We'll be back. Bye.